afternoon. Welcome to, well, I just said good afternoon. No need to repeat that. It's my pleasure to welcome you together with Pierre Mancini, who's sitting here, to session 5 of this amazing workshop. Session 5 may look like a somewhat unusual session. It's not about clinical trial designs. It's not about level of evidence, but it is about something that is very relevant for, I believe, many of us in our daily works. It's about statistical programming and how we deal with different options on the software side. So a warm welcome to session 5, Openstatsware, with the question, how can we build a scalable ecosystem? I promise that this session will be both entertaining and interesting. So I'm happy to see that also many people are here. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Sarjanne Päivike, who works as a GCP and GVP inspector at the Finnish regulatory agency. She's a pharmacist by training, and she has worked in several pharma companies, also sometime here in Basel, I've heard. She is with Fimea now for 7 years and will share some of her experience and her considerations around the requirements for statistical software. So, over to you, Sarjanne, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Lucas, and hello, everybody. You again have to look at another non-statistician, but I hope I'm able to give you some thoughts from our inspector's point of view. So my disclaimer, I'm representing one of the member states' inspectorates, and I have a colleague, for example, in Fimea, and there are several other colleagues in the regulator community that are kind of dealing with the same things as I'm now presenting to you. And here are my topics. So after the lunch now, you maybe are able to take one more ICH guideline. We had a few of them before this one, but here is one again, ICH E6, and go a little bit about the evolution of that, and I give you some of the kind of the draft requirements that will be in the newest revision of these guidelines, and a couple of other ones as well. I think it's the old presentation. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Is it? Okay. Can we take it offline so I can check whether it's
I don't want to send it
if you stop sharing, or yeah, I'll have a look. I can continue with this one even if it's the
So this is the one that I received. So I can do it in PowerPoint, but it may not show up well. But if that's what you want,
is this
from that's the date.
Yeah, I think I have a newer one.
Okay, so we'll switch speakers. And you go second.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I mean, yeah, because I am different. Yeah. Or maybe, sorry about this. Yeah, I share it for you. If you could send it to her. Okay, yeah.
I'm just
yeah.
Okay, so that's the life with Openstatsware, where we have to be very agile and flexible, I guess. So So that's why we decided to do that. Let's move to our actual first speaker then, and initially second, Juha-Pekka Pertola from Roche. For simplicity, you can all call him JP. So JP started his journey of analyzing clinical data in 2000 in Finland, and then he relocated to Roche Basel in 2006. He has been a statistical programmer, study lead first, project lead, and then a manager on large-scale molecule projects. Currently, he's a people and product leader in a team establishing ways for Roche data scientists to deliver the portfolio innovatively and efficiently. JP holds a master in statistics from the University of Helsinki, and he also holds a firm belief that through open collaboration, we can fundamentally improve the way we build data science product to help patients. So JP, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As you heard from my bio, I've always worked on the statistical programming side. And in that sense, it's a little bit nerve-wracking to be here because I've observed the correlation over time that the bigger the programming mistake it is, the more statisticians come to meet me. So I don't know what this translates to, but this is a pretty big mistake. But seriously, of course, programming mistakes are not fun. And I'll also talk about how this approach can reduce them potentially. So first, a disclaimer. So these are my opinions. And I'm not an outlier in the sort of circles where I am with these. So there are others who think very similarly. There was a time when I was an outlier. So that was the early days of this whole open sourcing thing. And people said that in pharma, no one will ever agree to open source anything. But I think we've already proved them wrong. So not an outlier anymore. So maybe I'll sort of ask you to do a quick show of hands. How many of you have sort of heard about Openstatsware before this presentation? Very good, almost everybody. Excellent. I don't talk about that actually that much, but you know it's, or if you haven't heard before, it's an open source collaboration to create R packages for sort of stats purpose. It's a great deal of sort of affiliations and support from ASI Bio, SIG, PSI, and FSPI. That's probably how you have all heard about this before. And I recommend to go there to the web pages. It has a wonderful blog section, for example, with lots and lots of information. But I put sort of a puzzle piece there to show that when we are talking about doing end-to-end R filings, this is just a small piece in there. And we need to consider sort of much more and how this piece fits in with the rest. So very brief history of submitting with R. So a long time it was claimed that it's impossible. There is a nice history compiled by Phil Fauser from POSIT. You can sort of find that with that link. It sort of lists all the, let's say, smaller activities that happened before. And then there's a really nice presentation of Novo Nordisk's first R-based submission. So if you haven't seen that, it's a great story that they tell there. And personally, I expect that after that, the discussion will end. Is it possible to do an R submission or not? But to my surprise, the discussion still continues. Is it possible or not? I have those debates in LinkedIn continuously. Then about a year later from the Novo Nordisk presentation, actually 2 days ago, we presented from Roche our first end-to-end R filing that we submitted to FDA, EMA, and in China. And I'll sort of explain a little bit the background, what other puzzle pieces were needed to do that. A second show of hands. How many of you have heard of Pharmaverse? Pretty good. Yeah, almost the same as for Statsware. So we sort of early on decided, first of all, we went to this open sourcing thing, sort of fully committed. And later on, Pharmaverse was born. And it's sort of a gambling term, all in Pharmaverse. It's not a gamble, we feel. There's let's say, a lot of companies there already working together as open source to create sort of the future of these R submissions. And the way we did it, of course, we use R, CRAN, Pharmaverse, then Oak, which is a tool to map raw data to SDTM, Admiral, which maps SDTM data to ADAM, and Nest, which creates both interactive and static tables, listings, and graphs. And I took as an example sort of the current state of the Admiral collaborations. So it started with very sort of small beginnings by one of our programmers and one of GSK programmers sort of finding each other in LinkedIn and starting to discuss that they were actually assigned to do the exactly same thing in GSK and Roche. And from there, it sort of quickly bloomed to full open source collaboration. And then we started to build these extension packages, so oncology, ophthalmology, vaccines, pediatrics, and metabolic. So you see sort of the companies there who have committed to develop those further. There are many other companies and individuals who are sort of testing these out and using them for different purposes. So under Pharmaverse, this and pretty much the whole end-to-end filing workflow is as open source. And the idea is that companies can sort of select the packages that they want and build the pipelines that they need. So it's not really prescribing that you have to do this and that. You can sort of select what you need. And if you want to get sort of started with Pharmaverse, there's a wonderful blog there which are linked to give more information on various topics. Then about the other puzzle pieces, and when you start sort of building that, it feels like that puzzle in the picture, but it's not that bad. So, but we've been sort of on this journey for a long time at Roche. And really what I want to emphasize is that we want to build submission packages more user-friendly for our employees and more user-friendly for review in a sustainable manner. And oftentimes, like when people talk about R, they think about it's sort of you save a license cost. It's about doing things cheaper. We are not thinking that way. We want to do things better. And part of that is this sort of sustainability. And we built this with a long-term sort of commitment in mind. So we started hiring our talent over 10 years ago. We built very robust teams. We've seen many companies, including Roche as well, build teams. They get excited by Shiny, and then they have like 3 developers there. They roll something out, but then all the developers leave. And we really wanted to build something very robust from the start and avoid that. We've been upskilling our data scientists with this new toolkit for a long time. Recently, it's been started to get assistance from the LLM tools. So when someone is starting, they can sort of learn by sort of asking LLMs, how would you do that? LLMs have been trained with these new tools, and they suggest how to program certain things. Of course, at some point, we got an approval from our upper management and the legal department to do all of this. We are quite empowered organization. So for the upper management, we pretty much said that we know that this is the right thing to do. We are going to do it. Are you going to stop us or not? And they didn't stop us. And with the legal department, I went into those discussions armed with all the arguments in the world. They sort of looked at the case. They said that this is post-competitive. How can we help you? They helped us to select the right open source licenses and so on to go on. So it was much, much easier than I expected to sort of get all of that through management and legal. Then in the background, we've been building a language agnostic statistical computing environment. Ours is called Ocean. We are just now moving all molecules to there. And it does the same work for all languages that you want to use. Also, we have created a validated R package repository. In my opinion, the right way of doing that, and we've done it like that, is that our IT department actually took responsibility to do that. So that sits sort of on the corporate level. So that's available not only for data scientists, but the whole Roche to use if they choose to do so. We've aligned the exploratory and regulatory environments. So basically we can move with these tools from the exploratory setting to a regulatory program and output in matter of seconds. So that's how we that's what we think that better looks like. We don't need to reprogram anything in a different language, putting it then into the regulatory workflow. We just generate the code and we are ready to go. With these new tools, we have much better capabilities for automation, parallelization. We think that that's a big part of how sort of programmers should do this efficiently. And we are sort of building this all in with fairness in mind. So on Ocean, there's a layer called Coral Reef, which sort of logs all the activities that happen with tables, listings, graphs, plans, everything. And externally, there has been very important activities happening with our validation hub. Good software engineering practices, Daniel Sabanes-Bov has been talking about that a lot. In the end of this presentation, there's a link section. There's 2.5 pages of links. I've linked other talks from Daniel as well there. This is one of his as well, which is linked here. Then what is really, really important are the R Consortium submission working group pilots. That's really showing they are built together with many companies plus FDA, and that's really showing again what better looks like. And Paul Schutte in the next presentation, or in the third presentation today, will talk how those pilots look like and what's included there a little bit. But of course, everything is built in the open, so you can find the Git repositories and you can find everything available already. So CAMIS, then many of you probably know, it's comparing sort of results between R and other languages on sort of to find out how and why sometimes the results differ. And what is then really, really important is that there's this new mindset across many companies of collaborating and learning together. And that's really going to help us to understand, again, how to get better. And we've learned a lot what to do and what not to do when building these collaborations. In the beginning, we wrote lengthy legal documents. As Hans-Jürgen has sometimes said, it was a complete waste of time. He's absolutely correct. We learned not to do that. We learned that just collaborate in the open and rely on the great open source licensing that is already out there. Few words on validation and risk management. So we are confident that we have solved this topic for ourselves. So there's no longer pretty much any discussion within Roche how to do it, okay? That might sound a bit bold statement that we've solved it, but if you think that we've done an end-to-end R filing, it was a prerequisite to do that we think that we have solved it. So we think we are standing on very solid ground. Of course, if we learn new things, we will adapt. But this is where a lot of the questions that always sort of raise up sort of point to. Again, in the sort of the appendix with the links, there's a lot of talks, mostly from Roche, on this, like how we solve this matter. So if you want to dive into details, that's all in those presentations. There is some new complexity coming from using contributed R packages. We find it manageable. Cost-wise, there is some additional burden from that, but it's offset by the benefits, in my opinion. I will talk about the benefits in a moment. What I would like to additionally say is that what people often forget is that, they make it sound like, okay, you sort of blindly select some random packages from the internet and then you make a filing, and that's not good. Of course, that's not good. That's not what we are doing. So we have rigorous risk management. Plus, then we still have the business validation, so the golden standard, reprogramming, double programming everything. And we tend to do that with a different language now. So we will find out if anything in that chain was broken. So I feel that often that sort of safety net of the business validation is forgotten. But the positives are the general reproducibility and unit testing are sort of done on a much higher scale and level as before. So certain things are easier to do. Is it viable cost-wise? So we do think that it is, and it has nothing to do with our being free. Of course, it being free is a sort of a good sort of thing to lower the entry barrier, but that's not, we are not here for the sort of to do it as cheaply as possible. But the benefits come sort of long term. So if you think that you buy a license for some software, that doesn't really give you anything pharma specific yet. So if you are going to crank out 100,000 TLGs, what you need to develop is tools to do that. So you develop TLG generation, packages or macros or something, you build Adam, you build SDTM. But now you don't have to do that as a company anymore. You can rely on these Pharmaverse tools. And we've stopped sort of maintaining, the tools still continue and exist, but we don't develop the legacy tools further. We fully lean on these Pharmaverse tools. And we think that with these better ways and tools to do things, we'll get the submissions out faster and better and without burning out our people. These are super complex to do in the sort of today's way, and people are really on the limit. And we want to sort of help our people, but we also want to help regulators by collaborating and understanding like what better looks like on your side. And these combined, we think that we will get the medicines to patients faster, which then, of course, brings in revenue and so on, which builds up the business case. What also is a benefit is that there's a reduced training and retraining need. So when many companies are using the same tools, including CROs, when we need sort of short term, many more hands on the keyboard, in the future, we hope that we are able to bring in people who, for example, already know Admiral from the CROs. And if you think of situations like, let's say, high pressure filing, you get pushed there as a programmer, you have very little time to learn the company-specific tools, that's when errors happen. So if the people know what they are doing, that will reduce the stress and errors and get away from the sort of panic need to learn new things. And there are other reasons as well, but these now came to mind as the most important ones. So if you go to the Pharmaverse front page, you'll see this there. So this is the current community that develops the tools. From our side, there are plenty of people who used to develop the company-specific tools. They are now active here. Of course, this community could happen in any programming language, but I think the conditions in R are the right ones to create something like this right now. As a sort of a collaboration enthusiast, I'm still hopeful that others do it as well, and they learn from what we have done. But this is sort of where it is happening right now. What else did we learn about collaboration? So, like I said, build openly. Don't prescribe. So let everyone sort of choose their way they want to find forward with these new tools. Of course, there's an external collaboration network, but you also need an internal collaboration network. So in my opinion, like bring Openstatsware and Pharmaverse together. Statisticians and statistical programmers need to collaborate more. Plus, we both need to collaborate with our IT functions that they do their part and so on. So internally, in some cases, you need big shifts to get everyone collaborating. We also see that in some organizations, the structures don't support this kind of thing so well. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Novo Nordisk did the first R filing and we did the second one. I think in both, statistical programming group is very empowered. In some companies, that's not the case. So if you want to build something like this, there will be sort of re-empowering some groups and so on. Lift as you climb. What we hear from people who are collaborating, they find it very enjoyable. So they feel that they can accomplish more. So if you're now thinking that I'm not an R developer, so why should I care about that? So I'm not an R developer either. And I feel by standing here and telling you about this, I'm making a difference. You can do that too, for example. What we are creating is something that supersedes any individual company. And with that, we think that on the long term, it will benefit the patients. So that's why I'm happy to come to talk to you as well. And there are many ways you can help raising the awareness or within your company or wherever you are, or creating space and possibility to others to contribute. And of course, it's been the sort of the theme of these kind of meetings, FSPI, Fuse, and so on, to, let's say, help all the patients that we can. If you develop a new statistical method, you are not developing that to help only the patients of your company. You are doing it for everybody. But this is a chance to bring that to a new level, to create really the software as well together. Last slide. This is a sort of, I recycled that from one of my earlier presentations. So this is Driftbrücke. So if you are staying in Switzerland over the weekend, you can go there. Kaspar can tell you how. This is from his backyard, basically, where he lives. I used this last time as an example that this is the bridge what we were building. So we were sort of halfway through in the previous presentation. Now with our end-to-end submission, we've gone to the other side. We found Novo Nordisk already there, so happy to meet you guys there. They took a little bit different route, but now we are there. And some might think, okay, that's the end of the story, but that's now sort of only a part of the journey. So what we want to do under Pharmaverse and under Openstatsware is to collaborate and find our way to the top where the best possible end-to-end R submission will be. What we need to do is to collaborate. We need to coordinate a lot and manage some risks. There will be fixed ropes. So some of those we have already. Of course, that's all the open source programs and so on. So it will get easier to climb. And there was a nice review from someone recently, from Leo Bus, I don't know who he is, but he complained that the public transport was not so good. So there will also be better public transport to get started with the hike, with examples and with descriptions and so on. But basically, that's where we want to go and go there together.
Many thanks, JP, for this amazing and indeed entertaining presentation. For the sake of time, let's continue with the presentations and have any questions afterwards. Okay. So, is there any burning, clarifying question that you would like to ask to JP? Yeah, there's one.
Thanks, Helly. So from my perspective, I've learned that the way you invest, the way you approach investing more versus how much gain you'll get is to prioritize a better outcome. So an E2N submission that is correct and that people are not stressed to get there. How do you train or get people to care about that within your community when they have to make the same solve the same question of how do I balance investment versus gain?
So we might be sort of in Roche in, let's say, a little bit lucky situation. So we never really had sort of, let's say, internal tension between the direction that Are we continuing on the path we are on, or are we sort of creating this new world? I hear that in some companies there are sort of groups who have different ideas where to go. So for us, luckily, it was quite clear that the sort of the investments would sort of all go to this new world. And I think, of course, sort of with pressure and so on, of course, whenever you do something new, there are sort of more unknowns in there. So especially in the beginning of this journey, it is more stressful for the teams to do that. So there is some forgiveness that you have to ask a bit for that. But I think it sort of can be managed. Thanks, Roger.
Thanks again. Also for highlighting the collaborative efforts. That's really great to see. So now with the correct slides,
Yeah, you try.
It's again my pleasure to welcome Sarianne, and over to you. Thanks.
Yeah. Hello again. So now this isn't working. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Technical problems as always. Okay, so I did go through my disclaimer and I was in the topic session. So we go through the kind of the framework from the GCP side of view on this theme of statistics wares. And sometimes we get the questions that does the GCP really apply to the statisticians? And of course we say yes. Go into the European clinical trial regulation, for example, it says that in these recitals and articles that the GCP should be taken into account when the clinical trials are planned and conducted. And also the protocol and the principles of GCP should be accordingly taken into consideration when the actual trials are performed. And this includes, of course, the study data and the analysis of it. So from our perspective, of course, the computerized systems used by the statisticians and these various programs and packages that you are using should be fit for purpose. So what is really fit for purpose depends on what you're doing with it. Are you just going to use it for kind of checking some, comparing results, or really putting forward and marketing authorization applications? So of course, that's the first question that you do. And then when you have decided on what you're using, the kind of the outputs that you have, which processes you follow and which records are then generated, eventually the clinical study report or the listings and graphs and such stuff. And then from kind of coming from the GCP side, where everything should have an audit trail, the traceability of all what has been done. And in my mind, the question why is here actually the most important question. So if you have that question, then you apply critical thinking. And eventually, when you have all the documentation available, then you have to kind of the proof that the data itself and the analysis of the data is trustworthy for making decisions. So therefore, our opinion as a GCP inspectors is that the GCPs, the statisticians do need kind of documented training on GCP principles, so at least they should be aware of these regarding the activities that they are involved with. And just a few kind of maybe, I don't know how many of you have been involved in inspections, but I'm sure most of you have at some point been involved in an internal audit. So what can you really expect? I'm now maybe talking for inspections doing in terms with the marketing authorization applications when you have all the study reports ready. and that sort of thing. So we usually ask for pre-inspection material, and these always include the whole package of the clinical study reports regarding the subs and other randomization list and stuff. Then we ask for organizational charts, who is doing what, which personnel has been involved, who are blinded, who are not, etc. And also the list of the parties that you are collaborating with. Are they your vendors or service providers or who? So those should be kind of clarified for the auditors and inspectors. And then, of course, an important thing is the kind of quality management systems you apply, and this includes all the SOPs and written procedures you have, and different study-specific plans that may be involved as well. And then when we talk about the computerized systems here, we usually also ask a very comprehensive list of different electronic and computerized systems that are used, and you should list what it's used for, what the versions are, who is the system owner, has it been validated, and when has it been validated, what are there any system interfaces and stuff, and also what sort of quality control steps or audit trails would be available for these systems that were used in the trials. So it's quite a large package what we usually get for inspection of a marketing authorization. It can be like 1 giga. So it's a lot to go through before the inspections. And this is mainly for the sponsor inspections, of course, we are now discussing about. So shortly about the ICH E6 evolution. About 30 years ago, the first GCP guideline was introduced. And already at that stage, there are the kind of the 3 main responsible parties here, which you can see are the ethics committee, and then investigator and the sponsor. And then it includes also in its sections which have the template protocol and investigators procedures and list of the essential documents. And then in November 2016 came the second version. The R1 was really editorial, but the R2 version of the GCP had kind of integrated addendums added to the old one. And there were some new sections like regarding the quality management, that one should identify the critical processes, identify the critical data, and how are your processes to control the risk related to these. And in the sponsor section, there was also new text about the need for sponsor oversight, and reminder that you can delegate the work, that the sponsor does never delegate the responsibility. And also as regards the electronic data handling, the addendum has approached to or required the kind of the risk assessment of the validation, which should be done for the systems used in the trials, and the SOP should cover these systems and installation and their use. But then as soon as, or nearly as soon as the R2 was ready, they started thinking about the new update of this guideline, because as you all know, the clinical trials nowadays are really complex and difficult. There's lots of different type of data and data sources and that sort of thing. So they started developing the R3, the newest version. And this is really to kind of modernize the and the whole picture, give more adaptability and flexibility in terms of these different study types, and also kind of to focus on the important thing and regarding the kind of the risk proportionate and risk-based approaches that should be applied. And again, here are the kind of the fit for purpose approaches which are mentioned here. And this is kind of the picture of the kind of the draft person. we are in the states that the principles have been it was a public consultation earlier, and it has ended, and those have been updated. And now the new sections in this Annex 1 have been, it's in a final draft, and I suppose we can expect the final release of these guidelines within this year. And then of course the implementation phase will be about 6 months afterwards. But here you see it's been rewritten in a way. There's much of the old, but there's a lot of new things, or the stuff has been rearranged, so to speak. So again, we see here the three parties, responsible parties, IRB and ISEs, and investigators and sponsors, as in the earlier versions. But here the data governance chapter has been added because it's felt that it's so important that it deserves to be handled in a separate section. And of course, there are some parallel things in, for example, in the sponsor section and the data governance section, but again, it's kind of given more focus in this new version. And then there's the Annex 2, which is currently still, I think there are some early drafts, and the public consultation probably will begin within next year or so. And then the glossary is separate, and there are again these three document types, again included in the appendices, and especially the essential record section has been, there's quite a bit new things in that one. And for this presentation today, I've kind of taken some samples of this new revision of the GCP guideline. Okay, so the principles, which was kind of the main thing that should be applied for all clinical trials. Traditionally, the GCP requirements were meant for trials which were included in the marketing authorization submissions, but nowadays it's also applied to many other clinical trials as well. But according to these principles, the first thing that it's not mentioned here, but the principle of the quality by design has been introduced. So when you start again from the very designing of the study, writing the protocol and everything, if you follow the kind of quality by design principles, you will eventually have a trial which gives the answers to your questions in a reliable manner. And number 9 of these principles is that kind of the obvious thing, that clinical trials should generate reliable results. And again here that the computerized systems should be fit for purpose, and factors critical to quality should be addressed in the design and adaptation for clinical trial purposes. And the second thing is the essential records should be retained. So as for an inspector like me or auditors, it may there may be a several years afterwards that you go and have a look at the documents that were produced during the clinical trials. So they should be readily available for inspection. And there's some new principles as well. I think the kind of the roles and responsibilities have been taken into focus. And again, reminder that if you transfer or delegate the work to a service provider, the responsibility still stays on the one that has done the delegation. So usually the sponsor, but of course, if investigator has kind of bought or implemented an electronic system, then of course they are responsible for that. So again, even if you're not the kind of the developer of these programs or Statwares yourself, the sponsor is responsible for ensuring that they are okay for the trial that you're doing. Okay, so now some sections from the draft sponsor sections, and I think these are applicable to any softwares. The new thing is that it's now referring to the ICH E9 for the statistical principles. And compared to the previous versions, there are now more specific requirements or things to consider, that the kind of the quality control of the statistical programming and data analyzing should be appropriately implemented. And again, the retainment of these records, so the quality control and validation processes and output should be kind of traceable to the particular software program, and there should be kind of a date and stamp so that we can follow the audit trail, and there were no changes which are not showing here. Then also in the sponsor section, I was thinking that how would you apply these certain topics if you have a kind of an Openstatsware developer, which is kind of a service provider, because you're not doing it yourself, it's somebody else doing it on your behalf. So the sponsor should have a documentedly assess the suitability of these services, whether it's a program or just doing the clinical work or something. So whether they can adequately undertake these activities. So would you have a justification for choosing this Openstatsware? Also, the sponsor should have access to relevant information for the selection and oversight. And for Openstatsware, I think this is pretty transparent. So I understand that they are well available in their website. But anyway, the software development records and validation records should be available for the sponsor. Then about the quality management, are there any risk with using an Openstatsware? And if there are they manageable? And also always the kind of the quality assurance and quality control groups should be involved in performing clinical trials. So if there are no kind of strategic plans for doing Openstatsware developer audits, then you should anyhow somehow assess the records that they have produced. And then also had a question kind of if you have an Openstatsware provider or developer, the EU clinical trial regulation requires that the documents are archived for 25 years. So are you sure that they are available for such a long period? And one thing, at least I was myself thinking that kind of traditionally in an agreement, it is agreed that the system developer would kind of report to the sponsor for any incidents that could have an impact on the use of the system. So if you have an Openstatsware developer which produces very fast-paced new versions of things, how do you get information of that? Do you review their website, for how do you get the information about any critical updates? And here is just a short picture about the data governance chapter. So their chapter 4.3 discusses the computerized systems, and of course this is applicable to the softwares, and what kind of issues the responsible party should ensure. These include different chapters which discuss, for example, the training and security management, and again more details about the validation and what to do if there are system failures, and the availability of technical support. So like the last point here, that if there are any defects or issues which appear, that they should be resolved according to their criticality. So if there's a critical bug or something that has an effect, then that should be, of course, resolved in a timely manner. And just a couple of links to a couple of guidelines which may be good to have a look at. So the IWC GCP inspectors have written this guideline on computerized systems, which also have sections on the validation. And then we have a QA webpage, which also has some questions which could be relevant for this topic. And as a summary for any Openstatsware, my recommendations are kind of to define the system and assess and control and mitigate the risk and test them upon the predetermined specifications and therefore thereby confirm they are fit for purpose. And you should review the risk regularly and look for new system versions which have been validated. And it's important that the validation records are available to you, and the inspections really are show and tell. We want explain to us what you have done so that we understand, because we are not statisticians. So make it to the kind of understandable for us as well. And if you did not do it yourself, how did you assess the performance of the providers? And important thing is to maintain the quality systems, and which includes the computerized systems. It might be in your IT department or even within your statistical departments. And finally, document any decision-making step. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ariane. I remember our GCP inspectors internally saying that this revision is ein großer Wurf in German, which means they expect that it will improve a lot.
Yeah.
So they were quite excited about this. So thanks for presenting this. Are there any burning questions? Doesn't seem to be the case. Then I would like to introduce the third speaker of this session. I'm happy to have Paul Schütte from the other side of the Atlantic, from the FDA, to be in this session. He is the Deputy Division Director for the Division of Analytics and Informatics in FDA's Office of Biostatistics, and there he has several roles. He has been with FDA since 2008, after having worked a few years in academia and as a government contractor. Among his roles, he supervises a team of statistical analysts who support the statistical and scientific programming needs of the Office of Biostatistics. And he is a CEDAR representative on FDA's Scientific Computing Board. There he serves as an OB representative on multiple working groups on artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we are very happy to have him on board here. His presentation will be on experiences that FDA has made with open source submissions. Paul, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. So whenever you're ready.
Let's see, you guys are going to advance the slides, correct? Okay. Let's see. So I work in a hierarchical organization, as you can tell. Next slide is the next slide, please. Here's the standard disclaimer. We can go to the statistical software clarifying statement. There's a link here to reference it. So this came out work started on this about 10 years ago in response to some questions that were posed at our meetings. FDA does not require use of any specific software for statistical analyses, and statistical software is not explicitly discussed in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, e.g. 21 CFR Part 11, which deals with the enabling legislation for FDA. However, software packages used for statistical analyses should be fully documented in the submission, including version and build identification. Next slide, please. As noted in the guidance E9, ICH E9, Statistical Principles for Clinical Trials, the computer software used for data management and statistical analysis should be reliable, and documentation of appropriate software testing procedures should be available. Sponsors are encouraged to consult with FDA review teams, and especially with FDA statisticians regarding the choice and suitability of statistical software packages at an early stage in the product development process. And as you can see, this goes back 9 years for the statement and almost 10 years since work began on this entire process. Next slide, please. So we've indicated that FDA is software agnostic. What programs should be submitted? So this is actually specified in a different document called the Study Data Technical Conformance Guide, which is revised twice a year, or updated twice a year would be more accurate. Sponsors should provide the source code to create all ADaM datasets, tables, and figures associated with primary and secondary efficacy analyses. Sponsors should submit source code, little technicality, single byte ASCII text format. No Windows executable files, and then there's a list of acceptable file extensions. And we also want the source code used to generate the labeling instructions. Next slide, please. So when we said text file, it does not have to be a .txt file. That was an interesting interpretation. And beginning in 2021, a list of file extensions that are helpful from a statistical standpoint are listed. C, CPP, M, MAT, R Markdown, RMD, PYJL are accepted in M5, module M5 of the system, while SAS and R are acceptable in across modules M3 through M5. And there's a link to the FDA page dealing with ECTD file format specifications. Next slide, please. This is somewhat technical. Right now, we're dealing with ASCII text codes primarily. UTF-8 encoding can cause problems with the current system. Next slide, please. There's further guidance that goes back some 20 plus years now in terms of what is acceptable in terms of the naming structure. There are restrictions on file names, lowercase only. File names can only have letters, numerals, and hyphens along with an extension. No spaces in file names, no uppercase, no underscores. This hasn't been updated since. And additional restrictions for directory names, no extensions. Next slide, please. A little bit about R. R goes back originally to S, which was originally developed at Bell Labs. by John Chambers and Associates. R was developed in New Zealand starting in 1993. We've had CRAN for a while. R Studio is a widely used integrated development environment that came out 13 years ago. And there is actually governance associated with use of R. There's an R core team in Wien, and there is the R Foundation, which supports that. Next slide, please. There's also the R Consortium. The R Consortium supports the R Foundation. Members include pharma and tech companies, as well as the American Statistical Association. The R Consortium has a number of working groups, the R Validation Hub, which was referenced previously. There is an R repositories, trying to look at a set of recommended packages. There has been a working group for R tables for regulatory submissions, and there is the R submissions working group. Next slide, please. The R submissions working group has initiated a set of pilots to illustrate how R could be used for FDA CEDAR submissions. So pilot 1 was based on generating tables, graphs, and analyses from ATOM data sets. Pilot 2 was a submission with an interactive Shiny component. Pilot 3 is more getting into the place where we're going end-to-end with R. It was a derivation of ATOM data sets from SDTM. Pilot 4 is in progress and is exploring in dual tracks a container method as well as a WebAssembly component. And it appears there may be other pilots in progress that are under discussion. Here, there is a GitHub site for the R Consortium for the submissions working group, and the data that's utilized for that comes from a CDISC pilot submission. Next slide, please. This is just an illustration that one can generate a standard demographic table for the first pilot. Next slide, please. Standard Kaplan-Meier plot. Again, this is pilot 1. Next slide. This is a similar Kaplan-Meier plot, but now with interactive features using a Shiny component for pilot 2. What is interesting to note is that one can deal interactively with a age as well as other variables that can be used to filter. Next slide, please. A little bit about exploratory analyses. Some sponsors have suggested using interactive exploratory analyses as part of the submission. One concern comes from ICH E9, section 5.7. In most cases, subgroup or interaction analyses are exploratory and should be clearly defined as such. They should explore the uniformity of any treatment effects found overall. When exploratory, these analyses should be interpreted cautiously. Any conclusion of treatment efficacy or lack thereof or safety based solely on exploratory subgroup analyses is unlikely to be accepted. So we had interactive Shiny apps that were reporting p-values, which is one of the concerns in this area. So our suggestion is any exploratory analyses should be clearly labeled as exploratory and distinguished from pre-specified primary and secondary analyses. Next slide, please. Other groups supporting R, there's an R in Pharma conference at the end of October. Registration is just open. There's an R in Medicine conference, usually in June. I've just listed the most recent one. Pharmaverse, we've already discussed. There's a USAR conference that goes on. This year was in July. And of course, the R Foundation efforts. Next slide, please. We do say OpenStats, so we probably should at least mention some other languages other than R. One is Python. We haven't seen as much uptake in the statistics for Python. Where we have seen it used is for natural language processing, text modeling, optical character recognition, data science applications, web scraping, those types of applications internally. And some commercial packages use Python. Next slide, please. Some challenges with open source that JP mentioned. One is the rate of change. The other is, who are you going to call? Who provides support for these open source packages? IT has a greater burden in some ways. So open source isn't exactly always free. It's been mentioned that there's a plethora of packages. Which ones can be trusted? And there are dependency and version control issues that need to be addressed. Next slide. Some reflections and observations. CEDAR has just begun to deal with completely R-based submissions, one last year and one this year. Hybrid submissions and hybrid workflows are reported. Internally, we've documented, for example, even 7 or 8 years ago that internally folks were using, reviewers and analysts were using hybrid workflows with a combination of proprietary and open source products. Recent graduates tend to have more experience with open source tools than proprietary alternatives. We do recommend that sponsors reach out to FDA review divisions when developing their software. One problem that we've encountered, for example, is that FDA Windows environments do not behave the same way as sponsors' Linux environments, particularly with regard to relative paths. Next slide, please. More reflections and observations. Open source tools are popular for at least initial cases of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Digital health technologies, while not specifically open source, have the potential to be a disruptive technology. Essentially, medical equivalents of the Fitbits that many people wear are generating vast volumes of data that require analyses. Let me close with one of our standard quotes: "With great power comes great responsibility," from Stan Lee. Open source tools and methods don't always promote good statistical practices, and we suggest avoiding p-hacking and cherry picking. Next slide. And I'd like to acknowledge my DAA colleagues, Hei-Su Cho and Yuan-Kyung Chang, as well as other R consortium members, Ning Lang, Joe Reichert, Eric Nance, and Joe Laksamani, and many others who are unlisted. And next slide is just basically the end slide.
Thank you, Paul. I hope you heard a round of applause here in the room. Thank you for the great presentation. We're going to move quickly to our panel session. And I will invite here to the panel, just come here, take a chair, push the chair to the middle so that you are on the camera. So Florian Klingmüller, with head of expert group at the Australian Medical Medicine and Medical Device Agency. Tobias Fellinger from Aegis, so the Austrian agency as well. Evtika Irini Psarelli, who is a scientific specialist in the clinical trial transformation, data analytics, and method task force at the European Medicine Agency, EMA. Alessandro Gasparini from Red Door Analytics, where he's senior biostatistician and software developer. And finally, Stefan Falgreen Larsen from Novo Nordisk. Stefan is principal statistician and is working as a product owner on internally developed open source R package. So welcome to all. Glad to have you there. Take a seat so that people can see you, and then I can put myself somewhere else. So I think we're going to go through a few questions. We'll start with a few, I would say, wrap-up questions or easy questions, and then people here online or in the room, I mean, go ahead with your question. There's already a question there. Okay, so I said we're flexible, so let's start with your questions.
Thank you very much for the really great session. One question about using open source for submissions, and more specifically the table listing figures, the outputs themselves, and improving the outputs. So what I mean is, maybe instead of using very long listings, one can now changing the software, improve the outputs, have interactive outputs, like in the just presentation we have seen. I don't mean exactly shiny, but some other ways. And what I wonder, maybe it will be review friendly also. What are your perspectives here?
So who wants to take this question, and state your name before speaking so that we know who is speaking. And do you have a mic? That's okay. Do we have more? There is one. You can share this one as well. Okay.
Yeah. I can try to answer that, or at least give my perspective on it. That is one of the, I would almost say, pet peeves somehow, to do something that's better for especially the reviewers when they get data. It doesn't have to be shiny, as you just said, but the possibility of being able to generate, for instance, HTML-based output that you can change slightly, perhaps instead of a long table that goes through endless of different scenarios, you can still have the table, but be able to look into it, have a search field so you can actually find what you're looking for. So I personally would fight a lot to be able to give that to the regulatory.
And I think a lot of people on our side would be happy about that. If it's
Certainly agree.
Yeah, maybe that's one thing that these kind of pilots could run, and we would be very happy to participate to try those things out. Would be beneficial for us too.
If I may add, there's a Fuse effort in the past that's actually shown that HTML slides can be submitted that include visualizations.
Thank you, Paul. Other questions? I mean, we started by the room here, so other questions here? Not here. Yes? All right. Okay. Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you, by the way, for the topic and the session. Just a clarifying question between what JP presented and then what, Sarian, you presented. So how was the documentation issue addressed on the vendor, which is basically the consortium delivering the R code?
Thanks for the question. So, I mean, let's say the process of, let's say, creating the validated R container sort of collects and risk manages all of those packages that we include. So basically, we have access to sort of the risk management evaluations of all of the packages that we include. Maybe that's best answer I can give. I would point you to those videos. Like, I think it's explained in very great detail in there as well. But we try to include everything that we can.
Yeah, and just a comment that very often, for example, when we ask for some documentation about a certain question, that the documents would be kind of human readable because sometimes they are extremely difficult to understand what we are given to, and the important thing that the sponsor itself can explain what has been done. So just a comment from that too.
Thanks. So we have Alexander and then an online question and then Kaspar, I believe.
Thanks so much for this awesome presentation. I think one point that maybe didn't really clearly come across is that that's quite an achievement for the overall community. If we think where the overall community started, maybe something like 10 years ago, nobody was, or lots of people were not thinking that this is possible. But some people believed in the vision and actually made it possible, which I think speaks a lot about this community. I think that also shows that we can do much, much bigger thing. And there's one thing that kind of is in my mind. When this is all open source and this is not competitive anymore, like competitive proprietary macros that are developed internally, what do you think is the burden or the hurdle to make the whole documentation of a filing publicly available so that people can really see what was done, how things were analyzed, and that it would be much easier for external parties to understand exactly what was done and not just have a protocol or the results or something like this?
If I may suggest, that's actually what the ARC consortium pilots are attempting to do. There are some limitations with the data sets involved because they basically have to be open as well. So to that extent, the ARC consortium pilots are set up to address this issue. The actual GitHub site has the actual software and the links to the data sets. That particular process has evolved, and we're actually in discussion with how to write things up so that the learnings are incorporated in terms of what were our exploratory steps as well as what we would now recommend.
Thanks, Paul. There was a question online. You can have my mic.
Thank you. From Christian Haggard Olsen from Nova Nordisk. How does authority see the potential in open source? The open and collaborative nature of these kinds of tools should enable more trust than what we have from closed source solutions currently used. Is this something you have considered?
There's two things that are really important for use of open source software in regulatory. First thing is most people know R. People who come out of university know R and understand the code that's submitted. And fewer and fewer people learn SAS at university. The other thing is documentation. That's not necessarily a property of open source software. For example, SAS documentation is very good and you can read everything online without even having a SAS license. And we were able in the raw data pilot to reproduce output generated with SAS in R. So yeah, I think that's the most important point.
Yeah, and I think there's also a component of the open part of open source software that it's publicly available. It's free, everybody can use it. So it adds
something in there that you don't have to pay a price to check what has been done, and that's a value in itself also. And it makes it easier for us to get it installed on our computers.
And if I can add something on what you just said, the fact that it's open also allows you to go and check behind what's really going on. So you don't only have to trust that the software package does what it says it does, but you also have the possibility of validating yourself by checking the underlying code, which is a big bonus, I think.
Maybe another point, I mean, there are so many advantages.
Yep.
I think we can go on. Is that also then when we have assessments that work with data, where we do reanalysis, and when we share them using open source software and literate programming, other agencies that are not directly involved in the assessment could theoretically reproduce the analysis, and also the applicants can reproduce the stuff that we do then. But I mean, that's not, we could all of this do also in SAS maybe, but it works, I think, right now also.
I have a very short question. So Kasper Rufibach from Basel. Stefan and JP, you represent companies who have done an end-to-end R submission. Now, if next week Sariane is knocking on your door and doing an inspection, would you be nervous?
That has actually happened, and yes, we were a bit nervous, as I think everybody would when it comes to inspections. But no serious problems were found. So for that we're grateful. But of course we were sweating a little.
So let's say, I'm not sure if that's the right question. Maybe the right question is that would we be more nervous than with non-open source filing? So I think we would be nervous in the old school way as well. But let's say, like I said in my presentation, I mean, from our perspective, we think we are standing on solid ground. So we would be happy to let her to have a look whatever we have created, and let's say I think that's the, let's say, power of this learning, that if she would find something, we would let Stefan know, and that they will fix it then on their side, and they know what to do next time. So that's how we would like to run this. Yeah. Thanks, Carl.
Yeah, just a comment that, like I show you in one of the slides, what sort of documents we ask for pre-inspection. And at the moment, of course, during the inspection, you have to kind of choose one or two electronic systems that you want to go in to have a look at more in depth. So at the moment, when the open source statutes are not common, of course, I would assume that it's probably would be one of the programs that would be taken for kind of scrutiny at this stage. But I don't know in the future if they get more kind of common compared to like SAS now is, so maybe that's not such an issue anymore. But if you have a good quality system to kind of control these systems, you shouldn't have any problems really.
One question on the stability of the R code base. I mean, what counts for pharma is long-term stability. And my understanding is R comes from the university world, and base R and recommended packages is managed by a couple of universities, I guess, based on volunteers. How can we ensure that this code base is maintained and developed also in 10, 15 years from now?
I can try to give it a go. So, I mean, of course, let's say, I mean, you never know that with proprietary tools either, if they live over extended periods of time. But it is volatile. But the good thing is that because of that, there are tools like RN and others who, let's say, help you to sort of freeze the environment, what you had at the time. So if sort of things changed, we can keep sort of that part that we used reproducible relatively easily. Maybe the other things, I mean, sometimes, let's say, it reminds me of discussion about Linux, which started as a hobby project. And now if you have most critical installation in the world, you put Linux in there. That's, I mean, the saying is that many eyes makes bucks shallow. So you can, through that collaboration, sort of get to a very robust place. And Microsoft had years that Linux is cancer and so on, and they released their own Linux now. So they also changed over time. But that's the way. I mean, we need to see, let's say, and that's why we select, for example, packages where there are lots of activity and lots of maintainers, because it shows that, let's say, there is most probably stability over time.
I would also just add that that is something that we are also looking at Novo Nordisk. How do we see this package to be maintained in the future whenever we are going to include it in our system? Another thing is also for popular packages. We have seen examples of the main developers stopping development, but it actually goes to another developer and then take it over, which is something you probably would not see so much in proprietary software. So in some cases, it could actually be better.
Just one point. My point was more on base R and recommended packages. So on the code base, not on what the companies are doing, but on the underlying code base. How is that? How can we be sure that that is maintained and available and supported in 15 years from now? That's specifically my question.
I can comment a little bit on that. And in brief, an answer is you can't. But you cannot do that with commercial software either, because if SaaS goes away tomorrow, you're in the same situation. So I think that's similar. And I'm aware that in our core and in the R community, there's talks about succession and what happens when lead developers of popular packages or R core developers actually do retire, because that happens, and R hasn't been around for long enough that this has happened a lot. But I don't know what the details are. I'm not an R core member, obviously. But I'm aware that there are conversations about this topic, and it's a topic that is actually quite, is gaining quite a good amount of traction in the R community. Yeah, maybe one more thing. I'm sure there will be cases that some of the packages we use will be sort of stop developing, and then we'll need to figure out how to change them in the pipeline. So it is something we need to do from time to time, I believe. Yeah.
And one thing that's even a benefit of open source software is if you would have a commercial product and the supplier goes out of business, the code is not available legally. And with an open source program, someone else could pick up the development without any legal issues.
Thanks. We have another question in the room.
Yeah, Anders Kost Rasmussen, Novo Nordisk. Maybe a bit of a cheeky question for the Pharmaverse people. I think it's amazing what you've been doing, but one also cannot help notice that there's quite the overweight of very large companies also in the Pharmaverse. And maybe it has to do also, I think you spoke a little bit to sort of the entry barriers. Are you doing anything to sort of actively work to lower the entry barriers also for the smaller and mid-sized companies?
Let's say only, let's say in the Pharmaverse context, only sort of, let's say, writing better documentation and guides and so on. For example, the Pharmaverse blogs have a lot of material how to get started and so on. The question that often comes is that how can we, sort of we being a small company, can have a validated R repository and so on internally. And in the links as well, so I have there presentations about creating a cross-company validated repository. So that's not under Pharmaverse, but those kind of activities would sort of help to lower the barrier, because it's there, the barrier is still there. I can give the point of view of the Openstatsware working group. We are currently 65 members from 35 different companies, and our goal is for the working group at least to have no entry barrier. So everybody is welcome to join. You don't have to join a work stream, so you don't have to join the group and then immediately start developing packages or something. So on our end of the spectrum, we try to keep the barrier very, to have no barrier of entry and to encourage actually anybody in the room, if you want to join the working group, you are very welcome. And I mean, that's not different for Pharmaverse. So, I mean, if you are an individual contributor, anyone, of course, can join. And not only to collaborate, like to program, there's a lot of, let's say, help that can be sort of given by documenting and other things, just to help sort of the progress. And I mean, sometimes we hear, for example, we were approached by some CROs that can we come to contribute to Pharmaverse? And we said, of course, but you have to realize that this is not billable time. We are not paying you for that. They say that they want to do it anyway because they believe in that this is the future, and the individuals wanted to learn how this kind of code development happens.
Thanks. It's amazing how this discussion is ongoing, and I feel that people are on fire. It is 4 o'clock already, but I think we would like to have one last online question or statement.
We have one last question online, which is that you can, and I think Sarian, you can chime in because I mean it's about email, so you may bring an interesting perspective on that topic.
So maybe briefly, how does EMA and other authorities see submissions in the future ones? Maybe also programs and data have to be regularly submitted. No problems, or do you have any concerns?
Well, yeah, I was looking at the clock, and I was just about to say that it's a good opportunity to re-advertise that we're currently running a raw data pilot at DMA. So we're looking for, let's say, volunteers from industry to come and submit to us individual patient data from clinical trials, and then we have our assessors within the national agencies or we at EMA to analyze that. So we're also software, let's say, agnostic. We don't, let's say, demand, from our assessors to use a specific software or the other. But of course, we need to, when we say software agnostic, we need also to think in the future, where the skills, the data analytical skills lie, yeah? We don't want one day, as you mentioned, earlier, that we receive some patients in MATLAB, but then we have nobody to know how to use that. So we need to look at that. And then something that we didn't have the time to touch upon, like the static versus maybe our shine and all that. As regulators, I mean, again, it depends what are the questions we want to answer. For example, if we want, I don't know, our inspectors, I'm thinking to have a quick and easy, visualization, maybe our shine, it's more useful than, having to, to code yourself. But then we also have to think something that was mentioned before, the traceability, the preservation of these, shiny apps in the future, because we need to go back, as Sarian said, and make sure that the traceable and accessible by all whoever from the member states requests that. So yeah, we're not going to enforce the use of a specific software. And while we're running the pilot, we're open to collaboration with the industry. So please, reach out to us.
Okay, with that, I think we are going to conclude and wrap up this session. And round of applause. And thanks.